The Alitalia Airbus A330 touched down smoothly at Florence Airport. Amerigo Vespucci. Mark, with a sigh of relief, loosened his seatbelt. The flight had been long, but the anticipation of exploring Tuscany kept him awake. Next to him, Lisa, his wife, was already standing up, grabbing their carry-on bags. Her eyes sparkled with the excitement of someone about to discover a new world. After going through customs, they headed to the car rental. A white Fiat 500, compact and cute, was waiting for them. Mark, meticulous as always, checked every detail of the contract before getting behind the wheel. The road winding out of the airport opened up to rolling green hills, dotted with cypress trees and vineyards. Lisa, delighted, rolled down the window, letting the warm Tuscan breeze caress her face. Mark, however, kept his eyes fixed on the narrow road, his hands gripping the steering wheel. "Chill out, Mark," Lisa said with a smile. "We're on vacation." The GPS, with its robotic voice and thick accent, finally guided them to their destination. A rustic wooden sign announced, Agriturismo Isabella. The stone farmhouse, covered in ivy, looked like something out of a postcard. A gray-haired lady, her hair tied in a bun, appeared at the door, with a welcoming smile. "Benvenuti," she exclaimed, with an Italian accent that sounded like music. It was Isabella, the owner. She led them inside, showing off the cozy interior, decorated with antique furniture and colorful ceramic objects. On the dining room table, a tray with buttery cookies, canducci, and a steaming pot of tea awaited them. Mark, with his rusty Italian, tried to thank her. "Grazie molto buono?" Isabella chuckled, showing the kindness of someone used to receiving foreigners. "Prego, prego. Welcome to Tuscany." Isabella showed them to their room on the upper floor. When she opened the wooden window, the panoramic view of the Tuscan hills took their breath away. A sea of vineyards and olive trees stretched as far as the eye could see, bathed in the golden light of a late afternoon. Mark immediately grabbed his phone to capture the moment, while Lisa simply took a deep breath, soaking in the beauty of the place. He checked the meticulously planned itinerary on his tablet. "Tomorrow, we're exploring San Gimignano," he announced. "We'll start with Piazza della Cisterna, then." Lisa gently interrupted him. "Mark, how about we just relax a little now? We just got here." A slight tension hung in the air, the first spark of a mismatch that would mark their trip. The next morning, after a hearty breakfast of pane toscano, prosciutto, and local cheeses, courtesy of Isabella, Mark and Lisa left the agriturismo, ready to explore San Gimignano. The sun was already shining brightly in the blue sky, promising a hot day. The medieval town, with its imposing stone towers, stood high on the hill, like a sentinel of time. They walked along the narrow, winding streets, paved with uneven cobblestones, which seemed to tell stories of centuries past. Mark, with his trusty guidebook in hand, read aloud information about each monument, each square, each church. Lisa, on the other hand, preferred to observe the details, the flowers in the windows, the lazy cats stretching in the sun, the locals chatting animatedly in Italian. She felt immersed in a movie, while Mark seemed more concerned with sticking to the script. The heat intensified, and thirst led them to an artisan gelateria, with a display case full of colorful and tempting ice creams. Mark, determined to practice his Italian, approached the counter. "Do gelati con fragola e limone?" The attendant, a young woman with an impatient smile, frowned, not understanding. Mark tried again, gesturing and pointing to the desired flavors, but communication wasn't flowing. Lisa, who was watching the scene from afar, decided to step in. With a charming smile and a few key words, fragola, lemoine, piccolo, per favor, combined with universal gestures, she managed to place the order. Mark felt a mix of relief and frustration. The language barrier, which he so feared, was beginning to manifest itself. He admired Lisa's resourcefulness, but at the same time, he felt a bit diminished. With their ice creams in hand, they walked to Piazza della Cisterna, the beating heart of San Gimignano. The square, surrounded by historic buildings and the famous medieval cistern, was bustling with tourists and locals. Mark, following the instructions in the guidebook, positioned himself strategically to take perfect photos, searching for the ideal angle to capture the beauty of the architecture. Lisa, on the other hand, preferred to sit on one of the steps of the cistern, watching the comings and goings of people, savoring her ice cream, and soaking up the vibrant atmosphere of the place. She tried to strike up a conversation with Mark, but he was absorbed in his photographic task, responding only with monosyllables. That mismatch, which had already crept in the day before, became increasingly evident, creating a subtle but growing distance between them. The dream trip was beginning to show its first cracks. The sun was setting on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink as Mark and Lisa were getting ready for dinner. Following Isabella's recommendation, they chose Trattoria del Gallo Nero, a family-run restaurant known for its authentic Tuscan cuisine. The atmosphere was cozy, with rustic wooden tables, checkered tablecloths, and walls decorated with old photos and kitchen utensils. The delicious aroma of fresh herbs and rich sauces hung in the air. However, when they received the menu, written entirely in Italian, Mark's anxiety resurfaced. He flipped through the pages, feeling lost amidst unfamiliar words: ribollita, pappardelle al cinghiale, bistecca alla fiorentina. The promise of a romantic evening began to unravel in the face of the language barrier. Mark grabbed his phone, seeking refuge in the translation app. The internet connection, however, was unstable, fluctuating between one bar and no signal at all. The translated words appeared in a disjointed way, making little sense. Lisa, noticing her husband's growing nervousness, suggested, "Why don't we ask the waiter for help? I'm sure he can explain the dishes to us." Mark, stubborn, shook his head.
No.
I don't want to look like an ignorant tourist. I'll try to figure this out myself. He clung to the illusion of control, refusing to admit his difficulty. Lisa sighed, feeling helpless. She understood Mark's pride, but she also realized that his stubbornness was ruining the mood of the trip. That dinner, which should have been a moment of celebration, was turning into a minefield of frustrations. After long minutes of indecision, Mark, guided by a combination of guesswork and random translations, placed the order. Lisa, trying to keep things light, ordered something that looked familiar: lasagna. When the dishes arrived, Mark's disappointment was evident. Instead of the juicy steak he had imagined, he received a thick, dark soup with pieces of stale bread. The ribollita, a typical dish of the region, did not please his palate, accustomed to American cuisine. Lisa, in turn, received a decent lasagna, but nothing exceptional. An uncomfortable silence settled between them. Mark, frustrated, poked at the soup with his fork, while Lisa tried to hide her disappointment. "You're not enjoying it, are you?" she asked in a low voice. Mark finally exploded. "No, I'm not. This trip is turning into a disaster. You don't care about anything. You just want to live in the moment, while I'm trying to make things work. Lisa, hurt, retorted, and you just want to control everything. You can't relax and enjoy anything. The argument, which had been building up since the beginning of the trip, finally erupted, turning the romantic dinner into a bitter confrontation. After the disastrous dinner, Mark and Lisa left Trattoria del Gallo Nero in silence. The atmosphere between them was heavy, laden with hurt and resentment. Night had already fallen, and the streets of San Gimignano, once charming and welcoming, now seemed labyrinthine and threatening. They decided to walk back to the agriturismo, hoping that the fresh night air would help dissipate the tension. However, the combination of narrow streets, darkness, and unfamiliarity with the place soon made them realize they were lost. Mark, who had insisted on skipping the taxi, felt guilt wash over him. With each alley they turned down, the feeling of disorientation increased. The map on Mark's phone, which he had obsessively consulted during the day, was now useless, as the GPS signal had completely disappeared. The full moon, which had previously romantically illuminated the landscape, now seemed to mock them. Panic began to set in for Mark. He was walking in circles, muttering curses under his breath, blaming Lisa for not having followed his original plan. "If we had taken a taxi, as I suggested, this wouldn't have happened," he exclaimed, his voice thick with frustration. Lisa, who had been trying to remain calm until then, felt her blood boil. "Oh, sure, it's my fault now." "You never take responsibility for anything," she retorted. The argument started again, even more heated than at the restaurant. They accused each other, throwing all their accumulated frustrations in each other's faces. With each harsh word, the distance between them seemed to widen. Lost in the night, physically and emotionally, they felt more alone than ever. The trip, which was supposed to strengthen their relationship, now threatened to tear it apart. Lisa, through her tears, suggested they ask someone for help, but Mark, overcome by pride and stubbornness, vehemently refused. "No one will understand us. We're in Italy, remember?" he said sarcastically. As they were arguing, they spotted an elderly gentleman sitting on a stone bench in front of a small church. He seemed to be observing the street activity with a serene and contemplative gaze. Lisa, ignoring Mark's protests, decided to approach him. She took a deep breath, gathered all her basic Italian, and, with a nervous smile, began. "Scusi, siamo, Percy. Parla inglese?" The gentleman looked at her with curiosity, furrowing his brow. Lisa, then, resorted to the universal language of gestures. She pointed to the map on Mark's phone, made a circular motion with her hands, indicating that they were lost, and pointed in the direction of the agriturismo, which she could vaguely see in the distance. The gentleman, with a glimmer of understanding in his eyes, started speaking in Italian, slowly, gesturing and pointing to the streets. Lisa, with the help of a few key words she could identify, destra, sinistra, dritto, and, above all, the gentleman's kindness and patience, managed to understand the directions. With a sigh of relief, she thanked him. "Grazie, mille grazie." The gentleman smiled, nodding his head. Following the directions, Mark and Lisa, still silent, but with a renewed sense of hope, finally found their way back to the agriturismo. Back in the safety and comfort of the agriturismo, Mark and Lisa headed straight for the balcony of their room. The silence between them was still thick, but the anger and frustration from the argument had dissipated, giving way to a deep exhaustion, both physical and emotional. The night was cool and clear. The full moon, now high in the sky, bathed the Tuscan hills in a silvery light. The scent of lavender and rosemary, carried by the gentle breeze, filled the air. The serene beauty of the landscape contrasted with the turmoil they had experienced. They sat in silence, side by side, but not touching, each lost in their own thoughts. The only sound was the distant chirping of a cricket. That moment of stillness, after the storm, seemed to offer a space for reflection. It was Mark who broke the silence. "Lisa, I'm sorry," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I was a jerk. I was controlling, stubborn, and I messed everything up." He turned to her, seeking her gaze. Lisa's eyes were teary, but she didn't look away. "I messed up too, Mark," she admitted. "I was insensitive to your struggles. I know you just wanted everything to go right, for the trip to be perfect." Mark took her hand, a simple gesture, but full of meaning. "The trip doesn't have to be perfect," he said. "It just has to be ours." "And I was so worried about sticking to the itinerary that I forgot to enjoy the moment with you." Lisa squeezed his hand, feeling immense relief at hearing those words. "I forgot too," she confessed. "I forgot that the most important thing is for us to be together, regardless of the unexpected." They talked for a long time, opening their hearts to each other. They spoke about the importance of communication, about the need to compromise, to adapt, to trust. The experience of getting lost, paradoxically, had shown them the way back to each other. The language barrier, which had previously seemed like an insurmountable obstacle, now revealed itself as a valuable lesson. True communication goes beyond words. It's made up of gestures, glances, mutual understanding. That elderly gentleman, whom they barely understood, had shown them that. They decided, together, that they would change their approach. They would abandon the rigid itinerary, embrace the unexpected, and allow themselves to experience Tuscany in a more authentic and spontaneous way. The trip, which had seemed lost, now gained a new perspective, a new purpose. The promise of a fresh start, sealed with a kiss under the Tuscan moon. The next morning, Mark and Lisa woke up with a renewed feeling. The sun streamed through the window, inviting them to explore. They put the itinerary aside and, instead of heading to the next busy tourist destination, they decided to do something different. Isabella, with her welcoming smile, suggested they visit Monteriggioni, a small medieval village, less known but equally charming. "It's an authentic place," she said, emphasizing the word. "You'll like it." Mark and Lisa exchanged a knowing glance. The idea of getting away from the obvious, of venturing into the unknown, appealed to them. They hopped in the Fiat 500 and drove without haste, enjoying the scenery. This time, Mark was more relaxed behind the wheel, and Lisa allowed herself to sing along to the songs playing on the radio. The tension from the previous days seemed to be a thing of the past. When they arrived in Monteriggioni, they were impressed by the simple beauty of the place. The village, surrounded by perfectly preserved medieval walls, seemed to have stopped in time. They walked through the narrow streets, without the crowds of tourists they had encountered in San Gimignano. They discovered a small, family-run trattoria, hidden in an alley. The delicious smell of home cooking drew them in. There was no English menu, and the Nana grandmother, who ran the kitchen, spoke only Italian. Instead of worrying about deciphering each dish, Mark and Lisa simply smiled and said, "Consigliere per favor, you recommend, please." The Nana, surprised and pleased with their trust, prepared them a feast, paisai, a type of handmade pasta, with fresh tomato and basil sauce, cinghiale, wild boar, slow-cooked with red wine and herbs, and, to top it off, a homemade tiramisu, light and creamy. Every bite was an explosion of flavors. They ate with pleasure, appreciating the simplicity and authenticity of that meal. After lunch, they walked along the village walls, holding hands. The panoramic view of the Tuscan landscape was breathtaking. The sun was shining, the wind was blowing gently, and they felt at peace. There was no longer the pressure to follow an itinerary, to take perfect photos, to understand every word. They were simply there, together, living in the moment. They chatted about trivial things, laughed about the difficulties they had faced, and made plans for the future. The experience in Monteregione, so different from what they had planned, had shown them that the beauty of travel lies precisely in the unexpected discoveries, in the genuine connections, in the ability to adapt and be surprised. That day, in an unknown village, they felt more connected and happy than at any other time during the trip. Tuscany, finally, revealed its true magic. The days in Tuscany flew by, and it was time for Mark and Lisa to return to Florence to catch their flight back home. A feeling of saudade, a sense of longing, was already starting to set in, even before they left. The trip, which had begun with tension and misunderstandings, ended with a deep sense of gratitude and connection. They packed their bags, reminiscing about the moments they had experienced, the laughter, the discoveries, the difficulties overcome. The little Fiat 500, which had been the scene of arguments and silences, now seemed like an old friend, a silent witness to their journey of transformation. They drove back to the airport, taking in the stunning Tuscan landscape one last time, etching every detail into their memory. The sun was setting on the horizon, painting the sky with vibrant colors, like a farewell spectacle. At the Florence airport, while waiting to board, Mark and Lisa decided to make one last purchase. Instead of touristy souvenirs, they looked for something that represented the experience they had had. They found a small bookstore and bought an Italian-English dictionary and a phrasebook of useful expressions. Mark flipped through the dictionary with a determined smile. "I'm going to learn Italian for real," he promised Lisa. "I want to be able to chat with the Nana next time we come back." Lisa smiled, proud of her husband's change of heart. She knew he wasn't just talking about the language, but about a new openness to the world, to the unknown, to the unexpected. The trip to Tuscany had taught them that communication goes far beyond words, and that true connection is built with empathy, patience, and respect for differences. Finally, they boarded the plane. As the aircraft took off, Mark and Lisa looked out the window, watching the lights of Florence fade away. They reminisced about the early days of the trip, when tension and frustration seemed to dominate. They smiled, remembering the argument at the restaurant, how they got lost in the streets of San Gimignano, and how the kindness of a stranger helped them find their way back. They silently thanked Tuscany for all the lessons learned. The trip hadn't been perfect, as Mark had planned, but it had been much more meaningful than any tourist itinerary could have predicted. They had learned the importance of communicating, adapting, trusting each other, and, above all, valuing authentic experiences, even if they were different from what they had imagined. They were returning home transformed, their hearts full of gratitude and the certainty that the journey of life, just like the trip to Tuscany, is richer and more beautiful when lived with love, openness, and the courage to embrace the unexpected. So, did you enjoy Mark and Lisa's story? We hope so. If you want to keep learning English with us, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to get notifications of new videos. Leave a comment telling us what you thought of the story and share this video with your friends who are learning English. See you in the next story.